Welcome to our webinar on developing talent and leadership from day one. Thank you very much for putting your time aside to join us today. We're going to try and keep the session to 45 minutes, although we will be able to spill over if the questions take us over that line. We very much appreciate you putting this time aside and joining us today in what we hope will be a very interesting and useful discussion. I'm going to begin with a little bit of light housekeeping before we do introductions and get started. Because of the number of people on the line, there's at least 20 people now, and that will probably rise over the next 10-15 minutes. Unfortunately, we have to mute all of the participants, but we do want you to get involved, so there will be poll questions, and there'll also be opportunities to send any questions you have through to us. So my name is Matt Plass. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Interactive Services. I'm joined by Bryce Tache, who's the Enterprise Learning Manager at Iron Mountain, and also by a colleague of mine, John O'Brien. Now, John O'Brien, if you could send your questions to John, he'll be able to feed those to Bryce and myself as we move through. We'll try to organize the questions as they arrive, but if we can't, we'll hopefully be able to come to all of them at the end. So we're going to start off with a question. It's the question you see on here, and I'll move this on to the next slide. And it's about when leaders become or realize that they are first leaders. So hopefully you've used a poll question in either a WebEx or a GoToMeeting before. I'm going to launch the question up on the screen now, and you should see it should be fairly obvious how you answer it. You're going to select from the 5 options: in the playground, at high school, at college, in their first proper job, or later in their career. And this is really just to get us thinking around the subject, the idea that leaders at some point must realize they're destined for leadership. When do we think that happens? So I can see nearly 60% of people have voted. %. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to close the poll now. Interestingly, nearly 50% of those of you who responded said that leadership begins in the playground. Leaders first discover their leaders in the playground. I would agree with that, and I think that ties in fairly nicely with one of the things that we're trying to illustrate in the webinar today. Interestingly, another 20% thought it began in high school, another 20% at college, and 7% in the first proper job and 7% later in the career. So I guess what we're saying is it can happen at any time, but we all, or the majority of us, feel that it happens fairly early in our life, certainly before we hit the workplace, either in the playground, at high school, or at college. And this, I think you'll see, will feed fairly well into what we're talking about as we move forward. So just so you know who we are, and we'll spend a very brief amount of time, I mentioned that I was joined today by Bryce Tache from Iron Mountain. Bryce, do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself and to the company?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Bryce Tache, as Matt said. I'm excited to chat with everyone today about developing talent and leadership. These are great passions of mine, and sharing a bit about our evolving efforts in these areas at Iron Mountain. If you're not familiar with Iron Mountain, we are a global leader in information management services. In the simplest terms I can think of, we help our customers protect, store, and manage their information, and then, of course, to realize the value of their information. So I'm excited to chat with everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. And Interactive Services design and develop learning solutions for global clients. Most of our clients are in the US, although we do have clients in Europe as well. We've worked with Iron Mountain on a piece of their onboarding program, which is one of the reasons we're talking together today. But interestingly, a lot of the themes that we've started to see coming through new hire and leadership training for many of our clients, Iron Mountain are a little bit ahead of the curve in many ways. So it's been great to get Bryce onto this webinar with us. Okay, so here's the proposition, what we're trying to prove with this webinar today. We believe that a new hire program that encourages leadership perspectives and what we call the performance focus from day one will build you a talent bench strength and will inspire future leaders. And we'll talk about what we mean by leadership perspectives and performance focus, but this is essentially the proposition. And over the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about leading from day one or even before day one when someone comes into an organization. We'll look at what we mean by performance focus. We'll talk about how those first impressions at new hire really stick. We're going to spend a fair bit of time looking at the Iron Mountain New Hire case study and then some further examples from other clients that show how these ideas weave together. And we will endeavor to leave time for questions at the end. So we're going to go straight into our next poll question. When did you first believe you could contribute to your organization above and beyond your functional role? So at some point, everyone comes into an organization at the beginning of their career in what's largely a functional capacity. You're a doer, you're a producer, but fairly early on, perhaps you realize that you're going to be able to affect in a positive way your organization beyond the role that you've come into the company for. Okay. So I'll close the poll now. I think most people have had a chance to vote. Okay. So again, interestingly, it's those early stages where we believe we first have insight into our own ability to contribute to an organization beyond the functional role. So we have 31% talking about before day one, which means I would take that to mean you just feel you're that kind of person. Before you move into the job, you know you're going to be able to impact the organization. 25% realize through onboarding, 31% during their first year, and then 6% when you become a manager, when you become a leader. So again, we have that sense that it can happen at any time, but it's heavily weighted towards early days. And there's a reason why we're asking this question. Lane Winwood in 2012 has talked about the fact that 67% of organizations find it very difficult to identify and engage and retain talented people. Organizations spend thousands on finding the right people, but often do nothing to continue developing the same important talent resource. It brings us to the question of what we mean when we're talking about the future, a future manager or a future leader. And here's one way of looking at it. We all know that at the early stages of a career, we tend to be individual contributors or team members, and then there's a movement into managing individuals and then on into leadership. Now, I'm sure you all have very clear ideas about what a team member, a manager, or a leader look like, but here's some ideas that we've put together. So team members are essentially functional. They complete tasks, they maintain operations, they work unmanaged 80% of the time. They are the producers. Managers would execute a leader's vision. They manage budget, they manage teams, and they solve operational problems as they pop up. And the leader is in that strategic position. They're setting the direction of the organization, they're inspiring, motivating, aligning inputs and efforts of organizational stakeholders to keep the vision alive, which is another word for making sure that when you hit a bump in the road, you don't abandon the project, you get it back on track, and creating a culture that will help bring the vision to life. So returning to our proposition, if we know, and the poll question suggests we do, that even at team member stage, people who have future leadership potential are aware of that, how do we get some of this leadership thinking in at that early stage? So we start to prepare people for the future early on. Well, it really depends, I think, on how you look at a career. And this is, I suppose, another version of the previous slide. It's one way to look at a career. You start as a team member, you move into management, and if you shine as a manager, you essentially move into leadership. But here's another way to look at a career. We begin over on the left in a functional capacity, but very quickly we start to pick up a few leadership responsibilities. And as our career moves from left to right through being a team member, a leader, a manager, director, up to VP and above, we start to see less functional and we start to see more leadership until at the end it's 100% leadership and almost zero functionality. If we see careers through this framework, we start to see that actually from the very beginning we want to build some of this leadership thinking and leadership perspective into day one and into that functional training piece. So I'm going to hand over now to Bryce to talk us through what they call the deal at Iron Mountain, which I think begins to illustrate some of the concepts we've started to talk about already today. Bryce?
Thanks. Yes, so at Iron Mountain, last year we rolled out a global framework called Managers Who Lead. And this is all packaged in what we call the deal, which is a hard copy summary of the program or of the framework. That the deal is shared with all new people leaders before or on their first day. So it really is one of the very first constructs that we introduce to our new leaders and immerse them in that framework. This is all about calling out, clarifying the role and expectations of our leaders at Iron Mountain. This applies to what we call here every people manager. So that's from frontline supervisors all the way to our senior executive team, so that everyone knows right from the start how we're defining and measuring the impact of our leaders. We aspire, and we rolled this out just last year, so this is a continuously evolving framework here, but we really aspire for this program to be the foundation of every performance discussion, every development plan, every interaction with our teams and colleagues. And certainly before its launch, we had leadership characteristics, we had developmental opportunities, et cetera, but we never really packaged everything together and shared it with our new leaders before or on day one. So I believe on the next slide, Matt, we have a sample of what those characteristics are. And rather than get into the overarching characteristics, maybe I can just spend a moment just quickly sharing that what we spent a lot of time doing was aligning each of those across 5 levels of the organization. And the goal here was so that we could be very explicit about the different types of behaviors, the different knowledge, the different skills that's needed to perform successfully. And of course, all of that differs across the different levels. So for a leadership characteristic of thinking and acting strategically, for instance, we might look to a frontline worker to demonstrate that by taking a logical approach to how to solve a problem with the customer. Perhaps for a more senior leader, we would look at that same characteristic and talk more about how you can think about an emerging business need and how you could lead a plan with your team to address those needs. I believe on the next slide there is another example tied into the thinking and acting strategically. And this is a virtual learning and networking event that we are piloting this year. We at Iron Mountain do not have field-led orientations. It's all done virtually, and that's in part because we have such a disparate geographic workforce. And what we're piloting here is all of our new hires, not just our people leaders, but every new hire, and we hire about 1,400 employees in North America each year. They attend a virtual session so that they can understand our corporate strategy in a way that really resonates, and how each employee coming out of this, they will then talk to their supervisor or manager to make sure that they understand what their role is in the larger organization and how they can help us achieve success with our customers or internally with our team members and, of course, with our shareholders. This session gets a bit into our culture, but really here the main goal is to make our new hires strategic, and most of our new hires are attending this type of session within their first 14 days. I think, Matt, you had either a poll question next or some other information you'd like to share.
We do. Thank you, Bryce. So, I mean, what's really interesting for me with what Bryce just shared is we're seeing a lot of our clients doing something similar, but they haven't pulled it together in such a cohesive package. I really like what Iron Mountain are doing here. They are definitely pulling some of those leadership characteristics and thinking back into the early stages of new hire, and we'll dig into this program a little bit later on in more depth, so thank you, Bryce. We're going to look at performance focus now. I think if you remember the proposition, and I'm wishing now I'd pasted it onto this slide so we could all remind ourselves, but it's essentially that if you build in leadership characteristics and performance focus, you build that bench strength in your organization, and you also encourage leadership thinking from day one. So there is another poll question. I'll launch it now. For those of us who drive, the question is, when did you feel you truly mastered driving a car? Before the test, when you passed, a few months later, you've driven for years, you still haven't mastered it. There's a worrying number of people taking that fourth option. I'd say there's a worrying number of people taking that first option also. Okay, that's great, thank you. So we've had 90% have voted. Close enough. So interestingly, again, there's a few people who feel before they took the test, and perhaps they had an opportunity to really master the car through their driving instruction. No one said they felt that way when they passed the test. Perhaps that's the adrenaline rush sort of falling. 71% said it was a few weeks or months of driving, and 12% said they've driven for years and still haven't mastered it. Well, for those 12%, I'm one of you, and I would say, hang on in there, it will happen. But most of us, or most of you, are in the 71%. After a few months of driving, or weeks of driving, you felt that you've mastered the car. And that is so true of new hire programs as well. However efficient and effective new hire programs are, one of the things we'll look at today is that unless they include real work and you can get out there and really run the car around the roads in the sequence that you wish to, you're not going to feel that you've mastered it. Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about performance focus, we're talking about that getting out there and mastering it in your own time. We've mentioned leadership thinking. We've talked about someone wanting to exhibit leadership characteristics from day one, but we also need to talk about a performance focus. So a lot of training, and this includes new hire training, and even leadership training, unfortunately, is about knowledge, acquiring knowledge in order to pass assessments, acquiring knowledge in order to pass it on to other people, or acquiring knowledge in order to just increase the volume of your own knowledge and therefore your experience. But we believe very strongly, particularly in new hire, you should be learning to acquire skills. You should be doing things and learning how to do things so that you can achieve goals. And I think where these two pieces come together, those goals become strategic goals for the company. So people are learning in their entry-level role how to perform a certain task, acquire a certain skill, but they can see how it fits into the bigger picture, and perhaps they're getting an insight into one day as a leader how they'll need to view that function and the way they'll need to approach managing it and leading it. So what does that look like? Well, it's very simple. It means you have to get people out there doing stuff. The formal training has to meet workplace activity. Many programs will do this in a before and after mechanism. So you'll be in the classroom learning and you'll go out into the workplace. We certainly think it's more effective if you can combine them in a more cyclical fashion. So as part of the training program, we ask people to go out into the workplace and complete tasks. So some of our clients, and Walmart are a very good example of this, they almost, I would say, have a mantra where they say your training is not complete until you've done it, until you've shown us that you've demonstrated to us that you can get out there into the store and complete the task. And although that isn't relevant to every single working environment, it's not a bad mantra to have. If I haven't been out there and done it, if I haven't shown my supervisor or manager that I have a competence there, it doesn't matter how many assessments I've passed or how many role plays I've successfully completed or how many simulations I've been through, I can't really say I've mastered. Another mechanism we use is the leader-learner model, and this is something that comes through in all types of new hire programs. You may have come across this before, you may have come across it under a different name. Essentially, it builds on people's current expertise. You'll be aware of the fact that many new hires come in from perhaps a similar organization that does something that you already do, but they don't happen to have your company experience and culture. You may find they have a huge amount of knowledge. It could be around customer service or even product. And if they do, empower them to lead as the expert. And if they don't, then they can learn. Now, what that means in terms of a training program is in the morning, you might find yourself leading an activity, and in the afternoon, you might find yourself being led by the very person that you were leading that morning. This is something that we can build into working practice, but more importantly, we can build it into the training. So from day one, you get that experience of leading. If you've shown you have a competency, you can take the activity materials and you can be the person who drives the training experience. There was some, I believe this is by the Aberdeen Group, a statistic when they looked at best-in-class onboarding programs, they found that over half of those programs include performance goal setting, as opposed to 32% in others. So over half of the organizations that have what we would consider to be best-in-class new hire have started building performance goal setting into onboarding. I suspect that number would rise in the next year or so. So I want to show you, to wrap this up with an example, so I'll hand back over to Bryce of what we talk about, or what we mean when we talk about leadership meeting performance. Bryce, do you want to talk us through what we're looking at here?
Sure. So this is a sample page of our deal, and specifically it's one of our leadership characteristics. So again, this is kind of outlining how we're looking for different individuals to behave as we perform at different levels within the organization. And for all of our new managers, we have instructor-led virtual workshops where our people managers go through a series of experiential activities to really understand how they can get the best from themselves and their teams. We don't necessarily have the resources to do those types of sessions with our individual contributors, but all new hires get they don't get the entire deal, but they do get a slimmed down version of our leadership characteristics. And very early on, one of our performance expectations of our managers is to sit down within the first 2 weeks, review the characteristics as applicable for the role, and make sure that there's understanding between the new hire and his or her manager and team, as well as that they are really used as goals are being developed, as Matt just talked about, to make sure that goals really can come back to these leadership characteristics. There's got to be that alignment there. And perfect world, that manager would have also used these characteristics even when they were going through the hiring process. So as they're forming their behavioral questions, they're making sure that perhaps someone already demonstrates some or all of these desired behaviors, and they know that before they even extend an offer. So we really are trying to make sure that these characteristics are intertwined with all of our other talent management processes and systems. And again, we launched this just last year, so it's a process that we can certainly improve on. And I think the biggest thing that we need to make sure that we're doing better is that every manager understands that, this applies to me. It doesn't just apply to a certain type of manager. It's, again, it's all the way from that first-time supervisor who has frontline employees all the way through our executive team, so that everyone is doing it consistently. And this is something that's further challenged by the fact that this is a global framework, and we don't necessarily have all the infrastructure in place to support that globally, so it's a lot of making sure that working with our colleagues in Asia-Pac or Europe, that they're on the same page and that they can tailor this so that it works in their own geographies as well. I think on the next slide, this is a sample of also in the deal. In addition to the leadership characteristics, our managers spend a lot of time going through what we call the employee touch points, which is really, as you can see here, the employee life cycle, beginning with attraction and recruitment and ending with leaving the business, although our hope is that perhaps at some time we can re-engage people who do decide to leave the mountain. What I just wanted to mention here is for all of our managers, new or tenured, we offer monthly what we call bite-sized virtual learning sessions. And these are half an hour long. They will focus in on one of these touch points. We typically have attendance of about 600 of our 1,200 global leaders. And these aren't sessions on, how do I initiate a leave of absence or how do I find a course in the LMS. These are really more where we try to get into how can I be a better or a great leader by demonstrating that I really care about my team. So we might really focus on here's how you can improve workplace well-being, or here's some ways that you can use our recognition program to really show that your team matters to you. We actually have a bite-sized learning session, coincidentally, just this afternoon, where our CEO is actually sharing with all of our people leaders how he defines good people management, and specifically how demonstrating how much you care about an individual as a person can also lead to business results. And I think, Matt, that's all I had to share on this slide.
Thank you, Bryce. That's great. So again, we've seen how Iron Mountain are putting some of these concepts into practice. They're taking this idea of performance-focused and leadership characteristics, pushing them together and coming up with the people manager concept, which is making sure that right from day one, that leadership perspective is being imbued by the individuals. So I think it's our final poll question. If I can open it. Here we go. So just before we look at how this fits into new hire specifically, how would you rate your onboarding to your present organization? Okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'll close the poll there. So I'm very glad to see none of you had a terrible experience. I'm not surprised to see that the majority of people came somewhere between okay and actively good, and 12% had a wonderful experience, which is very, very gratifying to see. I think it's interesting that 40%, 41% felt they were still in the dark around a lot of key areas after their onboarding, but the majority of people, almost 50%, felt good, and afterwards they felt they were ready to work in the organization. So I guess the challenge is to move the majority of people out of those middle two brackets and into that bottom bracket where they feel wonderful, up and working from day one. That's tough, but if we can do that, then obviously we have huge engagement. So when we talk about new hire training, just to very quickly touch on why this is important, you'll know this instinctively, but there are some statistics around organizations with a standard onboarding experiencing better productivity, greater new hire retention. We also know that while most individuals who leave a job after 12 months will stick out the 12 months so that it looks okay on their resume, they make that decision in the first 4 weeks. That's what exit interviews tell us. This means you have a very unproductive 11 months of that individual when they're already, in their mind, they're already out of the door. We also know that a great deal of staff turnover happens in the first 45 days of employment, and replacing an employee is at least 3 times the salary. It's very expensive business. So it's important. So what do you do in a new hire experience to avoid some of those pitfalls and also to bring in the leadership characteristics and the performance focus that we've talked about? Well, I think if your inputs are those two concepts, leadership characteristics and performance focus, and during your new hire experience you include some or all of these 6 ideas that we have in the middle of our slide here, you are going to be able to generate your future leaders. This is our experience from working with our clients, and I think it's Iron Mountain's experience also. So a good new hire, you could talk about each of these 6 with the sentence beginning, a good new hire experience. Well, a good new hire experience includes a piece on how to be successful. That's what people really want to know. They want to know how the company will be successful, they want to know how they will fit into that success, but more than anything, they want to know how they will be successful as individuals. So a new hire program should include that. It must include real work experiences. Simulations are fantastic, role plays are great, but why not get people out into the real world, buddying or sharing experiences or doing what little they can on day 1, perhaps a little bit more on day 2, perhaps by week 6 they're almost doing it all themselves. Those real work experiences and the demonstrating of those capabilities to new managers and supervisors are key to a good onboarding experience and the development of a future leader. Culture and value is very important. Across every new hire program that we develop, we find that the organization is incredibly keen to push its culture and values in even from day 1. We'll look briefly at a program we put together for SAP, where from the very moment they began, they were immersed in what is a very hard working culture at SAP, long hours and the necessity of building up your own network. Which brings us on to the next one, courageous networking. So cohort new hire programs are great for developing a cohort of people who all start on the same day. They can go on to be lifelong friends in some cases, particularly in the days of social media we're in now. But courageous networking makes people break out, forces people to break out of their cohort group and go and interview people who are already in the business, who have perhaps been in the job for a year or 6 months or 2 years, or who are a supervisor or a manager, and gain some of their experience and download some of their insight. A good new hire program includes a piece on what you can expect from your managers and leaders. And this is a little insight into the future because it's what you will be expected of you when you become a manager and then when you become a leader. New hires are very keen to understand exactly what the role of their manager, what they can expect from their manager, what their manager will expect from them. And finally, as Bryce explained through their Iron Mountain program, these leadership characteristics. Understand how leadership is seen at the organization, how it's articulated, and how that can feed down into your work, whether you're working in a call center or as a junior analyst. What are the leadership characteristics that you will be expected to display? So in a very simplistic form, if you take this leadership characteristics, this performance focus, and your new hiring program includes some or all of these pieces here, then you have far more chance of developing that future leader. So to see this in action, I'm going to hand over to Bryce again. He's going to walk us through the Iron Mountain New Hire Program. Hopefully, Bryce, you're on that slide now.
Great, thank you. And looking at what you just shared, it made me think of how far we still have to go as an organization. So we had done onboarding very inconsistently, and we had a very small budget to completely transform our onboarding experience. Our tagline for what we call the I Am Ready program here is to make onboarding amazing, and that's really what we're aspiring to do. We want every employee here to feel that way. We have a ways to go, certainly, but at the very least, what we want to make sure is that every employee here has a consistent, positive experience. We launched the I Am Ready program in Q4 of last year after about a year's worth of design. We did partner with Interactive Services in the development of one module that is really, which we'll be looking at later on this call here. We are expanding our program into Canada this fall, so we did launch in the U.S. only. And you can see our goals here really on screen, but to sum it all up, really what we were looking to do after a lot of analysis and a lot of sorting through data, we wanted to make sure that we were engaging our new hires in a way that we had not been doing so previously, that we wanted to retain our new hires. We were seeing that a lot of our new hires were leaving earlier than we would have liked, especially our new people leaders, and that was beginning to affect our leadership pipeline there. And we wanted to make sure that development was really an area of focus for our new hires as well. So we have a number of versions of the I Am Ready program. I think the next slide gives an example of our managers program, which this too we are piloting this year. So we launched for kind of like a one-size-fits-all program last year, and now we're really tailoring that for different audience groups and different geographies this year. I won't go through all of the details here, but you can see in the different blue boxes on the screen that this is a year-long program, and we had done a lot of benchmarking. We looked at a lot of other best-in-class organizations, and it seemed like one of the key things that kept coming up again and again was you couldn't have onboarding end, day 30, especially for your new leaders. So we worked with our executive team to help them understand that the longer that we could build out this program, the better. And many of the components here are virtual. Many of them are on the job. We really only have one 3-day instructor-led boot camp experience for our new people managers. So we are trying to figure out what is the best way to develop our new hires largely virtually. And one of those things that is helping us accomplish that is an e-learning module that all of our new hires go through. It's called the Iron Mountain Story, and it's really focused on who we are as a company and who we aspire to be as well. So I think, Matt, you were going to, if time allows, maybe show off a bit of that. And Matt, do you want me to speak to this slide here?
Yes, Bryce, so thank you for that. I can speak to this slide, actually, and then we'll have a quick look at the demo. So Bryce mentioned that we worked with Iron Mountain to put together an online piece as part of their onboarding program. And the idea from the very beginning was to make the whole experience a very good cultural fit for Iron Mountain. So the solution that we came up with, which I'll demonstrate in just a moment, is a 30-minute online module. It has a gallery menu. It allows people to move freely within the course and to explore some of the Iron Mountain values as they prepare for Life's a Mountaineer. I'm going to show an example of it quickly. Okay, so the purpose behind the online module was really to introduce new hires to the culture and the organization of Iron Mountain. You can see that for the look and feel, we went with this gallery approach, the idea that people are browsing. This was deliberately chosen to give a sense of empowerment to the learner, the idea that they can move through the content in the sequence that they wish, but also that there is a lot of value and enrichment here on offer for them. They receive a map of the gallery, which is going to walk them through the experience. And they're also going to hear from some of their peers. So as they explore this gallery, they're going to meet people who were in the same position they were in perhaps 6 months ago or a year ago. This is another key feature that we find in good onboarding programs, pulling back in people who have recently been through the program and asking them to give a testimony on what worked for them and what perhaps some of the challenges they had early in their career. So as part of this particular piece in the online, they'll be able to view videos of some of their peers who will talk about their onboarding we'd be very happy to run a separate demo of this for anyone who's interested, but I will return to our presentation for now. Okay. Bryce, maybe you could just walk us very quickly through some of the results we've had so far.
Sure. So right now we've been really at level 1 gathering of feedback, again, because we've only launched quite recently. But what's wonderful is that we are seeing a tremendous amount of adoption, and that's in part because we did have a communications and a change strategy that accompanied our initial launch of the I Am Ready onboarding program. So we're seeing about 90% adoption, including using an onboarding portal that we launched at the same time. Satisfaction rates are hovering in the mid 80% right now, and we've begun to do some level 3 surveying there as well. We have a very, very long list of things that we're looking to improve. Yep, exactly, including their managers. Thank you. And the module that Matt just showed, we have 90% completion, so 90% of our new hires are completing that module. And then lastly, what we're really looking to do, and this is going to be something that's going to take some time, we really are trying to integrate the Managers Who Lead program into our entire performance management processes and philosophy. We've begun to do that in some areas, and I'd like to see the day where that's done 100% across the board. We'll get there. Not quite there yet, though. And it's been a bit too soon for us to tell if how we're doing on increased retention of first-year employees. I think we're going to have some interesting data fall and this winter as well, to see if by doing onboarding more consistently and more effectively than we have in the past, is that contributing to a more engaged workforce.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. So I want to walk through a few other examples of programs we've put together for other clients. I mean, as I mentioned before, I think Iron Mountain really are a little bit ahead of the game here. They seem to have pulled this idea of leadership thinking into new hire in a way that I haven't seen done so as cohesively elsewhere, but hopefully we will in the future. But here's some other examples that show some of those new hire experiences in action. We recently put together a piece for Walmart for their new assistant manager. It's a 9-week program. It has a lot of class activity integrated with on-the-job practice and assessment. There's a lot of going out into the store, performing tasks, and being seen to perform tasks and demonstrating your competency. So it's all about culture and values, real work experience, and there's a big piece on how to be successful. We redesigned Capital One's onboarding program a few years ago, and there we focused very much on what the expectation was from managers and leaders, on how you as an individual will be successful, and again the culture and values piece, which they would have met at the recruitment stage, but it really helps to reinforce that on day one. I think I mentioned earlier the SAP new hire program we put together for their sales force. This was a 10-week program, each week mapped to a stage in their sales process. The focus here was very much on courageous networking, getting out of your seat, going to find other people in different parts of the business and interviewing them and talking to them about their role and their experience and their successes. So very, very early on they were asked to exhibit some of those leadership characteristics that would make them successful in the Graduate Academy. And lastly, when we did some work with AstraZeneca to redesign a new hire program that they had, again for sales in this case, there was very much a focus on real work experience, again on how to be successful, and also on culture and values. And interestingly, with this particular program, our design placed people into these what we call virtual cycles. These are salespeople who need to know about disease state and about medical products. It's a very complex set of knowledge. So we put them into these cycles where they learn about the product, they go out on field activities and ride-along activities until they've demonstrated that they have a competency around that very complex knowledge before they're allowed to move on the subway line towards the final knowledge assessment, the final field activity assessment, and then the upskilling, certification, and licensing piece. So these are just a few examples we've rattled through of how some of these ideas can be put into new hire practice. So I'm very aware of time. We have a couple of minutes left until we're up on our 45 minutes. I wanted to summarize with returning to our proposition that a new hire program that encourages leadership perspective and performance focus from day one builds that talent bench strength and inspires future leaders. So these are the 6 components we think you want to include in your new hire program: a piece on how to be successful, some real work experiences, the culture and values, some courageous networking, leadership characteristics, and a piece on what you can expect from your managers and your leaders. So we'll finish there. I want to say thank you very much, Bryce, for your contribution today, and also John, who's been working away in the background. If you have any questions now, please send them through either in the general chat window or through to John O'Brien, and we'll stay on the line for the next 3 or 4 minutes to answer those questions. For anyone who doesn't have a question or needs to leave us now, thank you very much for coming. We realize how busy everybody is, and the fact that you've given up 45 minutes of your time today means a lot to us, and we would certainly be happy to send on the PowerPoint that we've used today or answer any follow-up questions by email. John, do we have any questions? Let's have a look. Okay, so a couple of people have asked about slides as we move through the organization. The answer is absolutely, yeah, we'll be able to send that out. Okay, I think that's it. Well, thank you very much for attending. If you did have a question and it didn't make it through, please email it over to us and we'll be able to respond offline. But thank you again for coming and have a great day.